Ahoy there. Today on the Red Sea, doctors who have been in an "is anybody here a doctor?" situation. What happened? My mom has had to respond twice on flights when someone was in distress. The first time was in the air and a guy was having a diabetic low. She monitored him until we landed. The second time was sitting on the tarmac when a guy had a stroke. They delayed the flight and took the dude off the plane. She also said that after the first one, the airline sent her a thank you card and said please use these enclosed vouchers to get tickets to a destination of your choosing. But they forgot to include the vouchers. She said she thought it would be rude to write back and say hey you forgot the vouchers. I'm currently a first year resident. Internal medicine in Sweden. This happened last year, about a year after I graduated, so I was still relatively fresh out of med school. I was flying home from my vacation from the Mediterranean, or 3-hour flight, when they announced on the speaker system that they were looking for a healthcare professional. Stood up when they called out a second time. Maybe 15 seconds later, it was me and a bit older nurse who went up to the front rows, where a middle-aged male was awake but unresponsive. As I did not really have a lot of experience and was somewhat panicking, kept the panic internally to myself. It's scary being alone. I fell back to ATLS and eventually noticed that I had a D problem. Decreased strength in one of his arms and one-sided facial droop that was quite mild. Long story short, I suspected a stroke, but could not really do a whole lot. We were 30 minutes away from landing at the time of the initial call. They did not deviate or anything. I did not feel like I did that much, to be honest, except say that I suspected a stroke and asked if they could call an ambulance to the airport. The airplane seemed to land a bit faster than it usually does, and as we went off the runway, there was an ambulance waiting off the taxiway. When the ambulance staff boarded the plane, I gave a short report and that's basically it. I got a thank you from the relatives and the stewardesses. They asked me to write down my name and email, but I have not heard anything since. Out of curiosity, what do doctors actually do about a stroke? I always see adverts saying the faster you are, the more of the person you save. But how do they do that? Great question. Basically, to know if you can / should do something, you have to verify a stroke by doing a CT scan of the head. If it's a hemorrhagic stroke, you can either try to revert the medications that may be causing the bleeding. In some cases you may need to talk to a neurosurgeon if the bleeding may be evacuated. But these types of strokes are a bit rare, covering roughly 15% of all strokes. In terms of ischemic strokes, a clot that stops blood flow to a part of the brain. The most important thing you can do is to try and remove / destroy the blood clot causing the symptoms. Within 4.5 hours, we can thrombolyse. That is give a medicine that destroys the clot. You can also endovascularly go in through an artery into the brain and pull out the clot, but I personally do not have a whole lot of experience with these patients. This is why time equals brain. The faster you come to the hospital and seek medical attention, the faster we can diagnose and treat, and more % of the affected part of the brain may survive. Note, I'm not a neurologist. While we were on our descent, somebody lurched over in their chair and became unresponsive, tachycardic, and diaphoretic. The whole episode lasted for about 2 minutes. Then he woke up and vomited. I figured he had an arrhythmia and recommended he not take his connecting flight to Cleveland and instead go to the IMS was waiting on the ground and helped him off the plane. I actually saw him again on my return flight home. He told me he was diagnosed with an arrhythmia and made an appointment to see a cardiologist in our hometown. My friend has had it happen twice to him, both heart related in restaurants. Was able to use a defibrillator to save one's life and the other unfortunately passed. Defibrillators do not work if the heart is completely stopped, and CPR is a long shot and did not work in this case. My father, doctor, 30 years ago was sent to work in southern Italy, although he already lived with my mother in the north, and a large part of the salary ended up in tickets to return by plane every weekend. The fact is that during the flight to the south, lasting about 1 hour, they do not give anything to eat, except they pass with a trolley to give candies. Needless to say, the classic situation of the old woman who chokes on it and cannot breathe. My dad was called, and with a few heavy blows on the back he managed to get the candy out of the poor old woman. A week goes by and the day of the return on the plane comes. The trolley with the candies passes promptly, and out of nowhere a girl sitting in front of my father who was trying to get one is blocked by her friend. Do not take it. Last week they told me that an old woman got choked up, and to free her a doctor had to slap her really hard on the back. Not in the medical profession, but from my time in the military I knew basic life-saving techniques like CPR and what to do when someone is drowning. My story involved my son when he was 6 years old. We were in town for my father's funeral. That night at the hotel the kids were in the pool. It was packed. He was swimming in the shallow end. Next thing I know a girl is holding him saying I think has drowning. I pulled him from the pool. Asked if he could breathe. He shook his head no. I laid him down. Rolled him to his side and hit his back. He started throwing up lungfuls of water. Finally he says he can breathe. My wife is freaking out and he is white as a ghost. He threw up probably 4-5 times. Worst part is, when I pulled him from the pool my first thought is I'm gonna watch home die. My wife said I reacted so fast that I had H out of the pool before she realized what was happening. I almost lost my composure when he looked at me and said thanks for saving me dad. I recommend if you can, to take some basic life savings classes. Not me but my brother was on a flight when a woman had taken too many sedatives. It was her first flight ever. She threw up and choked on it. The flight attendants asked if there was a doctor on the flight over the speakers and my brother went over there. He treated her and probably saved her life and had to talk to the pilot about whether it was safe to cross the Atlantic. My brother said yes and she was fine for the rest of the flight. Happened in an airplane. Me, as a 4th grade medical student and my professor at an airplane for going to a medical congress in our country. A man 50-ish years old lost his consciousness. We got there before the cabin crew yelled the situation. Had to do CPR for 25 minutes until we had landed at an airport for emergency landing. We still had a 1.5 hour of way and we also landed off with him to make him reach hospital safely. It was a rural military airport. Airplane waited us to return. Took her 40 minutes later after we landed. Got to our destination. In return flight, we were upgraded to business class and taken from our hotel by a private chauffeur. 25 minutes of CPR. You must have been exhausted afterwards. Even 5 straight minutes on a dummy and I was telling the dummy he was not going to make it. You are awesome. We were 2 people and turned in every 2 minutes. I would be giving breathes and my professor would be on compression or vice versa in minute 15. We got a shockable rhythm, so we gave some shock also pointed ambulance. He had a regular heartbeat. It was nuts. I was in the car with my mother, who is a doctor, when a bad wreck happened about a mile ahead of us on the road outside town. I didn't see the crash but all of a sudden we were pulling up to the aftermath. Next to a grey blue Subaru that had its entire front pushed in. The woman driving was still in her seat, sitting upright. I could not see her feet, but she had bitten clean through her lower lip so that I could see her teeth and gums. Part of her lip was dangling. My mom got out of the car, maybe called 991, I cannot remember, and rushed the driver. She put her hands through the windows and held the woman's head and neck completely still while telling her repeatedly that help was on the way and she needed to stay calm and still. It was the most drastic case of code switching ever. My mom is a neurotic, scatterbrained nerd but as soon as she was out of the car she moved so fast and was so focused. I cannot remember how long we waited there before help came and they used the jaws of life to open the car. I do remember very vividly how the firefighter had to move my mom's hands away from the driver for her because she could not unlock her hands and arms. Not a doctor, but I'm CPR certified. I work at a gym and a guy passed out after coming out of the shower and people started shouting for someone to help him or find a doctor. Being a stupid teenager, I was too nervous to do CPR. I was scared if I made the situation worse or what if he did not need it. So, yeah, I probably should have done more. A few moments later an actual doctor came in. I remember he was naked and looked like Thor. The passed out guy woke up just as Dr. Thor came in though and wanted to leave. But Dr. Thor convinced him to sit down and rest a bit because something had happened to his blood pressure. I'm not a doctor, but I'm a nurse. Just yesterday morning, I heard these women screaming in the hallway of my hotel. We need help. Does anyone know CPR? I ran out the door and told these women I was a nurse. They took me to the front lobby where they found a young woman who seemed to have overdosed. She was not breathing, but she had a pulse at first. It started to get weaker then stopped altogether. I had to do 4 rounds of CPR before I felt a pulse again, and it was right as the EMTs were walking in. I work in nursing homes, and most people are DNRs. I have never had to do CPR on anybody. It's crazy that was my first time, and it was at a ducking hotel, and not even work. Then you just so happened to ask this question? Lol. Not a doctor, but story is still relevant in an opposite sort of way. Was watching a children's soccer game. 2 11-year-old girls collided. One got up, and her arm was hanging 90 degrees down halfway between her wrist and her elbow. It's not supposed to do that. She continued to play for a second and then realized what her arm was doing. She totally bugged out. She started screaming, "I think something is wrong here." All of the parents are yelling at the girl to take a knee and the ref to stop the game. I jump the fence with another parent. We get her to sit on her knee and rest her broken arm against the bent knee. I yell out, "Where's her parents?" Nothing. "Is anyone here a doctor?" Nothing. At this point it's been like 2 minutes since the original and obvious break. I take my phone out to call 911. 911 Hi, what's your emergency? I'm sure you have gotten multiple calls by now, but I just want to make sure. We have got a girl with broken arm here. Has anyone called for an ambulance? 911 No. No one has called. Where are you located? Question mark. There had to be 500 people watching this game. It was a regional tournament. No doctor, no parent. No one had called 911. About 10 minutes later the ambulance arrived. Mother arrived at the same time. She had to park a mile away. Big tournament. And just finally made it back to the game. Girl gets carted away. The remaining girls somewhat finish the game that had been shortened by 30 minutes due to this incident. Finally the next game starts and I take my seat on the sidelines next to some random parent. Her husband comes up next to us a few minutes later and she turns to him and says, "You missed all of the action." This man, pointing to me, had to help a girl who broke her arm. "Really?" he says. "That's too bad. I probably could have helped." I turn to him and ask him why that is. "Are you a doctor?" "Yes," he says. "I'm a pediatric orthopedic surgeon." For Doug's sake. The first doctor to show up when it's too late is the most qualified doctor. I just stared at him for a few seconds. Mouth agape. He looked at me sheepishly and just said, "I know, right? Don't not feel bad. You probably did the same thing I would have done. But I would have known it was the right thing to do." Lesson of the day. The more people around, the more likely that everyone assumes someone else had called 911. TLDR. Child broke her arm in front of me. A child arm fixer doctor happened to arrive just after she was carted off in ambulance. When I was in high school, one of my neighbors asked for my mom, a doctor, because her husband had collapsed. My mom, who does not practice anymore, she teaches in medical school, immediately went to the house and assessed the unconscious man. She also asked me to come with her in case she needed something. As soon as we got there, I saw that people in the house were panicking just standing still. Look at the man, but not my mom. She immediately checked if he had a pulse and if he was breathing. The way she acted was so calm and so sure of what to do. I felt that the man was in good hands and in a way made me relax. I felt that everything would be okay since she was here now. An ambulance could not arrive immediately, so she organized some of the neighbors to help transport the man to the nearest hospital. After that whole thing was done, my mom acted like it was nothing and just continued with what she was doing before it happened. I think that was the moment I realized how amazing doctors can be and how proud I'm to have a mom like that. Eventually I went to med school myself in hopes to be just like her. Girlfriend's dad is an anesthesiologist, the guy who manages your night drugs for surgery, to make sure you do not wake up halfway through, and so you get the right dosages of these drugs and do not die. He works technically as an independent contractor for a certain medical company that owns facilities here in Georgia. I would not name them. They all went to a big company dinner, were having fun, but somebody at a nearby table began choking badly, and just his luck, literally a table full of doctors, him being the bigger one of the group, gave him the honor of doing the Heimlich successfully. However, from the stress of the incident and symptoms afterward, they think he could have possibly had a minor stroke as a result, so they watched him before EMTs could arrive. He did not ever hear if the guy was okay or recovered, since there were a bunch of them and the family did not swap contact details with all the doctors. This has happened to me lots of times in my life. I'm currently a psychiatrist who specializes in care of people with medical issues, and I work on regular hospital floors. So despite being a psychiatrist, I remain well versed in general medicine. TL doctor, I thankfully did not have to do much very exciting to most people. First, medical school. Was walking home with my girlfriend and a taxi T-bones another car. The woman in the taxi was not wearing her seatbelt. Nobody else had serious injuries. The woman probably had a concussion, but was conscious. Broke some teeth, and probably her nose. Did not do much, but made sure she stayed stable until the EMS arrived. Second, in residency, after medical school, before being fully independent, was at a dance studio and a man had a very clear stroke, with sudden left-sided weakness, confusion, facial features, We got EMS there in 10 minutes and I made sure he stayed awake and had stable vital signs. Third, residency again, but later. Man had a syncopial episode, lost consciousness, at a restaurant, did not stop breathing, hit his head hard going down, was totally out of it after the event. Seizure or heart attack most likely, same thing. Made sure he stayed awake and conscious until EMS arrived, noticing a pattern. Got free dessert after they got him out. Fourth, residency again. Woman had a seizure in a grocery store, full shaking, drooling grand mal, protected airway, got her on her side, kept her safe until EMS arrived. Fifth, residency. Homeless guy found bleeding and confused on a train. Made sure he did not pass out and, you guessed it, stable vital signs until EMS arrived. Sixth, residency. Pregnant woman on train, got low blood sugar, watched vitals and luckily someone had a banana and water to give her. Watched her until EMS got there. Seventh, more exciting. Fellowship year, optional special training after residency and before independent practice. Air India flight from Delhi back to the US. Never been. Was amazing trip. Flight attendant calls for a doctor. Nobody else. At least awake. On the plane responds. Woman in first class with severe stomach symptoms. Vomiting. Sweating. Intense pain. Air India is fairly well stocked and had good anti-nausea medication. Was most likely food poisoning. Schwas not from India and had some street food before the flight. Crew had a surgical kit and were a little too enthusiastic about the possibility of my needing to use it. I checked on her several times and she stayed stable throughout the flight. Did need several rounds of nausea/diarrhea meds and used their whole supply of vitamin/nutrient enhanced fluids. Got a bottle of champagne leaving the plane. That's all to date. Unfortunately it is the end of the video, but do not worry, there are many more coming. Like and subscribe for more videos from the Red Sea. Thanks for watching.